Once there was an empire that stretched across 3 continents, from the Balkans to Arabia, from the Caucasus to the deserts of Africa. At its heart stood not just a sultan, but an army forged in faith, discipline, and unwavering loyalty. This was the Ottoman army, not just a force of warriors, but of guardians, servants, and believers. Every rank told a story, from the Acemi Oglan, the raw recruit molded in silence, to the Janissary, a soldier of the Sultan's will. From the Solakbaşı, shadow of the throne, to the Serdar, commander of destiny, and at the pinnacle, the Padishah, ruler of sword and soul. This was not an army of chaos. It was a machine of divine order, a hierarchy where every man had a place, and every place a purpose. Before they drew swords, they bowed their heads. Before they marched, they prayed. And when they fought, history trembled. In this video, we journey deep into this forgotten structure, uncovering the hidden ranks, rituals, and responsibilities that held an empire together for over 600 years. These aren't just ranks. They are echoes of discipline, whispers of loyalty, and footsteps that still echo across time. So join us as we unveil the secrets of one of the most disciplined and feared military hierarchies the world has ever known. This is the Ottoman army. In the vast machine of the Ottoman military, the Acemi Oglan was the spark that would one day become fire. He was not yet a soldier, but he was chosen. Selected through the Devshirme system, taken from the Balkans or Anatolia, Christian boys were brought to Istanbul and enrolled into the heart of the empire, the Acemi Oglanlar Ocha, the corps of novice boys. This wasn't just military training, it was a complete transformation. For years, the Acemi Oglan would learn Turkish, Islam, discipline, loyalty, and the art of obedience. He would serve in the palace, in elite households, in farms, learning humility through labor and strength through structure. Only the most promising would advance to the elite ranks of the Yeniçeri Agha. The rest? They would become administrators, scribes, artisans, still within the Ottoman system, still loyal to the state. But those who endured, those who adapted, obeyed, and learned to love the empire that once took them. They became the foundation of the Sultan's elite army. And Acemi Oglan didn't carry a sword, but his hands would one day hold the banner. He didn't give commands, but his silence was his first form of discipline. He didn't wear armor, but every day he forged one in his heart. In the chain of command, the Acemi Oglan was the seed, and in the gardens of the empire, only the strongest seeds were allowed to bloom into warriors. The Yeniçeri was not just a soldier, he was the blade of the Sultan, the breath of the empire, and the iron discipline that held the Ottoman army together for centuries. After years of training as an Acemi Oglan, only the most loyal, most capable, and most hardened were accepted into the ranks of the Yeniçeri Agha, the elite infantry corps of the Ottoman Empire. They did not serve for money. They did not fight for land. They served for order, for honor, and for the Sultan's will. Clad in white robes and distinctive headgear, burq, the Yeniçeri was trained in archery, swordsmanship, musketry, and absolute unity. They moved not as men, but as one body. They ate together, trained together, lived in barracks called Oda, and saw the state as their true family. To disobey was not just dishonor, it was death. To flinch in battle was not failure, it was betrayal. And yet, they were not silent tools. Within their own ranks they had codes, elections, leaders. Each Oda had its own traditions and brotherhood, its own pride. On the battlefield, they were the wall between chaos and order. In ceremonial times, they were the protectors of the throne. The sound of their marching drums echoed like a heartbeat in the streets of Istanbul. Their banner bore the tukhra of the Sultan, and their loyalty was forged in ritual, not blood. To be a Yeniçeri was to be more than a soldier. It was to become the living law of the empire. In the disciplined corridors of the Yeniçeri barracks, order had a face, and that face belonged to the Başçavuş, also known as the Odabasi. He was the bridge between command and the common soldier. He didn't bark orders on the battlefield, but his word in the Oda was law. To the young Yeniçeri, the Başçavuş was a mentor, a judge, and sometimes a quiet executioner. Each Yeniçeri company, or Orta, was subdivided into barracks called Oda, and at the head of each Oda stood the Odabasi. He ensured that every soldier trained, prayed, ate, and lived according to the iron discipline of the corps. He enforced silence during sleep, he upheld hierarchy during mealtime, and he delivered punishments when lines were crossed, but his power wasn't just internal. On the march, he kept formation tight. On campaign, he preserved morale. If a soldier died in battle, the Başçavuş made sure the man's death was not in vain, nor forgotten. He knew every man by name. He knew who was brave, who was scared, who was loyal, and who needed watching. Yet, above all, he was a veteran, one who had once stood where the novices stood now, with fear in his eyes and fire in his heart. The Başçavuş was not at the top of the command chain, but he was the foundation upon which the Yeniçeri system stood. To anger a commander was dangerous, but to lose the respect of the Başçavuş, that was suicide. If the Yeniçeri was the blade of the empire, the Bolukbaşı was the one who aimed it. Commanding a Boluk, a military unit of roughly 100 soldiers, the Bolukbaşı was more than just a higher rank. He was a field leader, a tactician, and a symbol of trust. Unlike the Başçavuş, whose authority lay within the barracks, the Bolukbaşı ruled the battlefield. He walked at the head of his men, shoulder to shoulder with courage and death. He was the voice they followed when drums thundered and the smell of gunpowder choked the sky. He wasn't chosen for birthright. He wasn't appointed by politics. He rose through blood, discipline, and undeniable leadership. When orders came down from the Orta Ayası, or higher, the Bolukbaşı translated them into motion. Formation, maneuver, engagement, it all flowed through him. If one Boluk faltered, an entire line could collapse. That's why the Bolukbaşı's strength wasn't in his sword arm. It was in his ability to hold the line when the world fell apart. He had to inspire his men without shouting. He had to correct mistakes without crushing morale. He had to see the terrain before the enemy did, and act before the order came. His armor bore scratches from old battles. His eyes carried the memory of fallen comrades. And his voice, though calm, carried the weight of command. In the Ottoman military machine, the Bolukbaşı was the pivot point where discipline met action. To follow him was to survive. To disobey him was to be buried nameless. If the Bolukbaşı moved the soldiers, the Orta Ağası moved the system. Commanding an entire Orta, a full company of the Yeniçeri Corps, often numbering several hundred men. The Orta Ağası was a seasoned warrior, a master of logistics, and a guardian of discipline on a scale that touched every layer of the chain. He was no longer a man who followed orders, he gave them. He spoke directly with the Yeniçeri Agha, received campaign directives, assigned positions, and saw to it that the unity of the Orta was preserved under any condition: cold, heat, hunger, or siege. But his power was not only vertical, it radiated outward into the culture of the corps. Each Orta was like a tribe with its own traditions, internal hierarchy, flags, and battle songs. And the Orta Asi was the spiritual and strategic heart of it. He appointed officers, reviewed drills, mediated disputes, and ensured that no soldier forgot why he served. He also reviewed every man's record, who fought bravely, who failed to rise, who earned promotion, and who risked disgrace. On the battlefield, the Orta Agha did not raise his voice often. He didn't need to. His very presence could correct a formation. His silence could provoke fear deeper than a shout. In ceremonies, he walked just behind the Janissary Agha. In war, he stood just behind the line, not out of fear, but to see everything and command it all. The Orta Agha was the pulse of the corps. As long as he moved with strength and clarity, the entire Orta stood like stone. But if he faltered, the empire would feel it. The Sekbanbasi was not born in the heart of the palace. He did not live in the barracks of the Yeniçeri, nor did he dine under domes of marble. He came from the frontier. The Sekbanbasi commanded the Sekbanla, irregular infantry often recruited from rural lands and frontier towns, trained to fight with fierce adaptability. They weren't full-time soldiers like the elite Janissaries, but in times of war they became the flesh and blood of the battlefield. Leading these men required something different, not strict ceremonial order, but the ability to manage chaos. The Sekbanbasi wasn't just a soldier. He was part tactician, part motivator, part father to hundreds of fighters who often had nothing but their weapons and loyalty. He had to hold together forces with no shared brotherhood, no shared language at times, only shared purpose. Under his command, Sekban units manned siege lines, guarded supply routes, and stormed city walls before the cavalry arrived. His armor was simpler, worn from dozens of campaigns. His hands bore the scars of survival, not ceremony. He was the commander of firepower, often placing musketeers on ridgelines or forest edges to ambush invading troops. Unlike the officers of the Central Army, the Sekbanbasi fought among his men, not above them. He bled with them, ate with them, and when needed, buried them with his own hands. He was rarely decorated, rarely remembered in chronicles, but without him the empire's military campaigns would collapse under their own weight. The Sekbanbasi was not just a field commander. He was the iron spine of a temporary army, holding the war together while others claimed the glory. The Solakbaşı. To lead shadows is to command the unseen. He walked not in front, but just behind the Sultan, yet he was always at the heart of power. The Solaks were elite palace guards, positioned to the left of the Sultan, and the Solakbaşı was their commander, the chief of the Sultan's personal shield. They didn't just wield bows, spears, or sabers. Their greatest weapons were silence and loyalty, because they guarded not just against blades in battle, but also against poison in goblets and betrayal in whispers. The Solakbaşı was more than a warrior. He was a strategist, a watchful protector in both palace intrigue and battlefield chaos. He had to sense danger before it took shape, and act without being seen. Only the finest were chosen as Solaks, tall, striking men with sharp reflexes and unwavering obedience. But their selection wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. The Sultan turned his back to them. That was the empire's deepest trust. Their name, Solak, meaning left-handed, came from their ceremonial position on the Sultan's left. And when war broke out, they didn't just guard. They fought, shoulder to shoulder, with their ruler. The Solakbaşı didn't need words. A glance was a command. A step was a strike. You won't find their names in many books, but their silence protected an empire. The Solakbaşı was the unseen blade. He moved without sound and struck without warning. The Yeniçeri Agha. He wasn't just a military commander. He was the voice of thunder behind the most feared army of the empire. At the head of the Janissaries, the elite infantry of the Ottoman state, stood this man. His word could mobilize tens of thousands. His silence could send fear rippling through the ranks. He reported directly to the Sultan. And yet, he ruled a world of his own. The Janissary Corps was a state within a state, and the Yeniçeri Agha was its sovereign. Chosen from within the ranks, he had proven himself through discipline, intelligence, and battle-earned respect. But once appointed, he left the battlefield and entered the palace, becoming a high-ranking member of the imperial court. His responsibilities were vast, managing the training and discipline of the corps, overseeing internal security in Istanbul, guarding the Sultan's palace, and even influencing imperial politics. In times of war, his orders could shift the balance of empires. In times of peace, his presence could restore order or ignite revolt. The Janissaries saw him as a father. The palace viewed him as a power broker. Enemies saw him as a shadow they could never touch. But power came at a cost. He walked a narrow path, balancing loyalty to the Sultan with control over an army that could overthrow him, and many did not die in battle. They vanished in silence when their influence grew too great. Still, the Yeniçeri Agha remained the steel spine of the empire. To command the Janissaries was not just a duty. It was a risk, a privilege, a test of fate, and only the boldest survived it. The Serdar was not a title given lightly. It was reserved for men chosen to lead the entire Ottoman army into foreign lands. When a campaign was too vast for even the Grand Vizier, the Sultan appointed a Serdar. To become a Serdar was to become the shadow of the Sultan on the battlefield. He wielded ultimate authority, commanding armies numbering in the tens of thousands, issuing decrees in the name of the empire, and making decisions that could redraw the map of the world. But he wasn't just a warrior. He was also a statesman, a logistician, and at times, a negotiator. The Serdar had to secure supply lines across continents, pacify local rulers, and manage the egos of competing pashas. He traveled with his own mobile palace, a campaign tent filled with maps, scrolls, and secret orders. His sword, forged by the finest masters, his robes, a blend of authority and fear. But above all, he carried the Serdar Fermanı, a royal decree that gave him total command. It was power and a burden. For if the campaign failed, the Serdar would answer directly to the Sultan, and Ottoman justice showed no mercy. Some Serdars returned as heroes, showered with gold and titles. Others never made it home. To be a Serdar was to play chess with kings, with lives as pawns. And in the annals of Ottoman history, only a few names bear the mark of Serdar, men who marched east into Persia, west into Europe, and deep into Africa. Not just with armies, but with the will of an empire behind them. The Serdar didn't just fight wars, he shaped history. At the pinnacle of the Ottoman military hierarchy stood one man, the Padishah, the Sultan, the shadow of God on earth. He was not just the ruler of a vast empire that stretched from the Balkans to Arabia. He was also the commander-in-chief of one of the most powerful military machines the world had ever seen. Every campaign, every conquest, every order ultimately bore his name and his seal. The Sultan's role was not symbolic. Many Ottoman sultans led campaigns on horseback, sword in hand. Sultans like Mehmed the Conqueror or Suleiman the Magnificent carved their names into history with both crown and steel. In battle, his tent stood at the heart of the army, guarded by elite warriors, adorned with silk and echoing with the sound of war drums. But his most powerful weapon was command. The Sultan could appoint and dismiss any rank, from the lowest Janissary to the highest Serdar. He controlled the imperial treasury, the Divan, Council of Viziers, and the Sheikh-ul-Islam. He was the living embodiment of law, faith, and warfare. But with absolute power came absolute risk. The Padishah was both revered and feared. Palace intrigues, assassination plots, and rebellion were constant shadows on his throne. He wore the imperial turban not just as a crown, but as a target. Every victory was immortalized, every failure a stain on the empire. Still, it was under the Sultan's banner that empires fell and rose. He was the axis on which Ottoman destiny turned. To march for the Sultan was to march for glory. To defy him was to defy divine order itself. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications for more deep dives into global military powers.